We caught up with business consultant extraordinaire Pavlo Phitides. Pavlo Phitides consults to companies on 4 continents around the world. This guy really knows how to help you manage your business. So if you really need to help as to how to negotiate a crisis, you need to listen to Pavlo Phitides. Enjoy this.
Hi, my name is Pavlo Phitides. I'm a founder of a business, investor in quite a few, an author, a speaker, and all to do with business growth, innovation, specifically orientated around the private business owner.
Okay, going in there, going in there. And in there. Cool. 3, 2, 1, action.
Hello Pavlo, welcome to our Leading in a Crisis webinar. It's great to catch up with you again. Really good to be here at your offices, your new offices. The last time I was with you was in Rosebank, so there isn't really, we can see that business is going. I'm going to kick off with slightly differently to some of our things. Now, we've just come out of the lockdown. Many of us watched a lot of Netflix, we did a lot of stuff. You didn't quite sit around watching television, did you?
No, definitely not, Mike. You know, I've been very, very fortunate and very, very privileged. And the reason for it is I've got some clients in Hong Kong. And in December, late December, I got a call from my clients who started to describe the conditions of the lockdown. And they said to me, this is not a joke. It's actually quite serious. And they described what they were experiencing. They described what the mood and the tempo was. And if you read anything about pandemics and flu viruses, they move from east to west. What happens in Hong Kong was going to happen in Johannesburg, was going to happen in London, was going to happen in New York. I've got clients here in South Africa, in the United States, in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in Singapore. And I turned around and thought to myself, gosh, we better figure something out fast here. It's going to come, it's going to happen, and it's not going to be personal, even though it will feel that way. So we sprang into action.
And you sprang into action. And what did Pavlo go and do? He wrote a book. This wonderful book, Reset, Rebuild, Reignite, which is almost a manual.
It is. You know, the way that came about is, so part of the things that we did, as a business, we engage with people. We talk to people. We meet with people. Our business is built by people. And people are made up of one thing really in truth that drives success, and that's the mindset, the attitude. So we knew we had to get the mindset right first so that we could then deploy strategy and tactics to consider taking advantage to the changes that will be brought upon us by the lockdown. The first thing we went and did is I ran a webinar, and it was called Build a Business Battle Plan to Survive and Thrive in the Corona Crisis. And there were 2 inspirations for it, Mike. The first is, I've been doing martial arts for years, and I've always believed in one statement that was made by arguably one of the roughest, toughest heavyweight boxers in the world, Mike Tyson. He turned around and he said, everybody has a plan until you're punched in the face. Because when you get punched in the face, what immediately happens to you physiologically, you take a breath like that. And in the moment that you breathe in the top part of your lungs, it releases and flushes adrenal and cortisol hormones through your bloodstream. And what you then experience is freeze, fight, flight. And Mike, you don't make good decisions in those environments. So what we did is I drew on probably the most valuable piece of insight and wisdom that I have ever come across. It was written by a woman who had dedicated her life as an American-Swiss psychologist to understanding what happens to people when they lose someone they love, someone close to them. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was the founder of the grief change cycle. She said that when you face loss, the potential of loss, the first thing you do is you go through denial. The second thing you do is go through a period of frustration when it starts to be evident that this is going to happen. And that frustration translates into either fear or anger. I remember when I got the call from my clients in Hong Kong, the first thing I went through was anger, because I knew all the plans for 2020 were out the bucket. The next thing she said is that dumps you into a well of depression. And it is your job and your responsibility to emerge out of that depression. Because when you're in a depressed state, you will not see, hear, or act in a positively inspired, grounded, realistic way to re-emerge and create new meaning in your life. She said the best way to do that is through experimentation. Because you don't know what you don't know, and no one knows what the future is going to bring. And mostly we've never known what the future is going to bring, because if we did, we would have all expected this. She said, in that experimentation, you will see what works, you will see what doesn't work, double down on what works, integrate that into your life, and create new meaning without the person that you've loved and lost. And in my view, when I look at the business owners I work with, and I look at myself as a business owner, my business gives me my meaning, it gives me economy, it gives me purpose, it gives me value. It is essential to who I am as a human being. And with the corona economy coming and locking down business, I used that grief life cycle in order to first address all our clients, all our suppliers, and especially all our staff. But only, Mike, after I got myself through the initial frustration, the well of depression, which for me lasted about 2 or 3 minutes, and sprung back into action, immediately understanding that what I'm doing will only be found in truth through action, what works and what doesn't work. So leading yourself first and foremost in a crisis is absolutely essential. If you don't get that right, there are a number of tactics, there are a number of strategies, they're all irrelevant.
Yeah. So those stages are going to hit regardless of who you are, and I suppose your message is it's a question of how long you spend in the stages that aren't really going to help.
Yeah, it's what you do with it, because you need tools and techniques. You know, when I had a very, very, very fortunate, by chance, occasion to have lunch with the comedian, what was his name? Good Morning Vietnam.
Robin
Williams. And it was a number of years ago, about 20 years ago, in Prague. And I went to a restaurant, I sat down in the restaurant, a man came up to join me, it was Robin Williams. And I never knew at the time, because it was so out of context, I didn't recognize him. And we started talking, complete stranger, an American tourist in Prague. We sat down, we had a conversation, and I thought to myself, gosh, this man is truly one of the most naturally funny people I've ever come across. I never ate my meal.
Yeah.
I just laughed and laughed and laughed. And then you hear about him ending his life because of persistent depression. When you're in a depressed state, you won't see, hear, or understand any opportunity. You need to manage yourself through it. And what I did is I shared 6 different tools that I've used through my life with all our clients and all our staff. And I'll share a couple of them. So the first thing that you learn in martial arts is when you step into that ring and you get punched in the mouth, if you panic, your entire body stiffens. And when your body stiffens, your opponent has the opportunity to throw a punch at you, which you absorb in total, the full impact of it. Whereas if you loosen, the punch can come and you can move with it and disseminate its power and energy and use it against your opponent. And there's a trick to getting that right. And that trick is understanding how to breathe when you're feeling stressed and when you're feeling shocked. And what we were taught over many, many years is the moment you punched, you breathe into the bottom of your lungs. And that prevents the adrenaline and cortisol taking control of your sanity and mind. There's a second tool that I use actively, and I spent 4 days and 3 nights in a yeshiva in Jerusalem a number of years ago. And I sat there being housed, fed, with accommodation, but subject to a whole lot of mind-bashing stuff, which was fantastic, because I got an insight into the Kabbalah. And the thing that stood out for me was where it spoke about where energy comes from. And energy comes from the future, much like the apex leaf of a plant. The leaf right at the top of the tree, or right at the top of the plant itself, that stretches out and reaches out into the open space to get the sun in order to photosynthesize and feed the entire plant. I'm a firm believer that unless you understand why you do what you do, and the purpose behind it is well understood and clarified in your mind, it's very difficult to migrate into positive energy, because that positive energy in the future says, I have control to make that future. The crisis today is in the present. It's already happened. I have no control over the exact present moment. And I certainly have no control over what happened before. So if you think and work with a future forward mindset, it helps you get into a positive space and out that well of depression.
And that target, that goal, is not to make money.
Making money is essential in a business.
Yes.
So look, I'm not going to criticize people's goals, but I can share with you what I've seen. If I look at my own history, perhaps I should have been more money orientated. Perhaps it should be more around making money. But here's the thing. The only thing I've ever seen sustain in a business is a business that serves a purpose. And what that means is a couple of things. The business is built to serve who? Who do you serve? If you run a business that's trying to be everything to everyone, 2 things will emerge. The first is you become nothing to everyone. And the second thing is you will live a life of absolute chaos. You will never get into a flow. You will never get into a position where you can get a run rate and momentum in order to do more and do better of what you do. Businesses are built to serve in every instance, unless it's an oligopoly or unless it's a monopoly. But they are built to serve. If you're not serving and providing value, you don't exist, you don't survive, you don't thrive, you don't survive.
And I suppose the proof in a South African context is we've got some perfect monopolies that, in their case, they've lost their purpose. One looks at Eskom, right, Transnet. They are monopolies. You can't really go anywhere else for their services, but they've lost their goal.
Completely. You know, Mike, the way that I see it is, and some people might argue that it's an unfair way to look at things, but it's my way of looking at things. I've worked extensively in corporates, with corporates. The corporate environment in South Africa is not nearly as competitive as it ought to be. If you look at our economic history and how our economy emerged, it was effectively an economy that was built to support colonialization. It was an extractive economy mindset. Big businesses were established over a period of time. Institutions were built around them in order to maintain their status and capability to support the extraction of value from South Africa to the colonial powers.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was exacerbated in World War I, it was exacerbated further in World War II, because gold, iron, ore, platinum, minerals were vital to fund the processes of the war. What we have never successfully managed to do was to migrate our economy from being an extractive-orientated mindset into a value-adding, creative economic mindset. And because we missed that step, I think that we exist in an economy that remains highly concentrated. If you look at any one of the sectors or industries we're in, there's a big three or a big four. And the big three and the big four seem to operate with relative ease until the last 5, 6, 7 years. Because the country hasn't grown, very big businesses struggle to grow in a no-growth environment. And yet over that same period of time, in order for people to create economy for themselves, the growth and the increase in, let's refer to it as SMEs, businesses beyond the startup phase, moving to about a 300 million rand revenue, those businesses have increased in capacity, capability and size. So if we argue that for the economy to really work well, and for us as a country to emerge out of our economic slump, which in itself is a very severe crisis, we should be orientating most of our efforts around that mid-tier SME sector. And I'll tell you 3 reasons why. Firstly, it's made up with people who have done the hard yards. They're sitting 10, 20, 30,000 hours in. They have everything to lose, if not to build, thrive, and grow their businesses. And what that does is it creates competition, because it's a highly, highly well-represented environment. If you take any one sector and you count the mid-tier SMEs in that sector, here's the argument. I don't have big institutional capabilities around me to survive. I certainly don't have a big balance sheet around me to survive. I certainly don't have a massive brains trust of C-suite executive boards and big tier advisors to help me to survive. I have to survive by being relevant to my customers. And yet my customers are facing changing environments themselves. So it means I need to change to remain relevant. For if I don't, my breakfast, lunch and dinner will be eaten by my competitor. And that spurs innovation within that business. And innovation attracts 2 things: talent and funding. And talent and funding drive further competition, which drives further innovation to attract further talent and funding. We sit here as a country wondering where our economic growth comes from or should come from, and we're constantly focusing on the wrong things. If we focused on exciting, enabling and spurring on competition in the mid-tier sector of our economy, South Africa will emerge out of this crisis ahead, a step ahead of where it is before it entered into the crisis. And the reason it's so important, Mike, that it gets done at a country level, it gets done at a private business level, is because crises usher in change. And the change occurs like this. I had my life, things were fine, bang, we've been punched in the mouth. Everybody now expects things to be different. And that expectation breaks the status quo. And if you can read what the expectation is and you can respond to it, it's your opportunity to step way ahead 6 months from now of where you were before you entered into the crisis itself. It is a remarkable opportunity for mid-sized businesses. Corporates struggle because for them to institute changes takes time through their monolithic, massive organizations. But the private business owner with a team of 10, 50, 300 staff, that opportunity will never be found again. If you don't strike now to capitalize on the change in status quo by resetting and rebuilding your business to be relevant to the changed needs of the people you serve, in order to remain relevant, not to make money, in order to remain relevant, you will miss out on your single biggest growth opportunity that I think exists in your lifetime as a business owner.
Now, Pavlo, we've discussed the mindset. We've got that right. We understand that this is almost a once-in-a-generation, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Where do we go to from there?
Yeah, so where do you start?
Where do you start?
So you start at the front of the battle. It's time for you to take leadership into action. If you've understood where you are in the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross change life cycle and you find yourself in a positive space, understand where your staff and your employees are too, as well as your customers and suppliers. And then, Mike, when a crisis emerges like this, you have to fundamentally, profoundly understand your business. And I'll share a story with you that took place about 7-8 years ago, where I met the CEO of Anglo-American Worldwide, Marco Tufani. He's an Aussie.
Yeah.
And you know what that means? Aussies know how to hold a drink or two.
Yes.
I can't. I've been raised on milk most of my life.
It's all that martial arts.
It's all that martial arts. I have a sip of wine and I will not stop talking. And the occasion was a social occasion, and he sits down at the table. I sit down at the table with him and he says, so, pouring a glass of wine for me, pouring a larger glass of wine for himself, what do you think of Anglo? And I said to him, Mark, sip of wine, now I'm out of control. I think it's like a big fat onion. And he says, really? How so? And the person who had introduced me and set up the meeting shuffled in their seat very awkwardly. It was an employee in Anglo at the time. And I said, here's the thing. Anglo no longer understands what makes it valuable, unique, and special. Because it's had such a long, easy run, relatively speaking, it's attempting to be everything to everyone in mining. And a lot of us allow our businesses to emerge into that place and space. And I introduce something, and I talk about it in the book, called the onion peeler. Because to understand your business, and to understand what actions you need to take to capitalize on the opportunity we spoke about, you have to understand what's essential and non-essential in your business alone. And if you look at it, Mike, an onion's got 3 layers to it. The outer layer, the middle layer, and the heart of the onion, where the flavor lies. If you take a step back and look at your business in the same light and say, well, who are my customers and what makes me valuable to them? And in order to deliver that value, what is absolutely core and strategic for me to own, hold, and have? And if you look at that in terms of plant and equipment, your human talent, people, your intellectual property, your approaches, your templates, your proposals, your ability to make something happen, and you look at it in the midst of a crisis with the view to say, I want to understand the inside heart of what makes my business valid, and mark up and tick up everything that you have that is absolutely essential, without which you have no business. And then from there you move into the middle layer and say, okay, if I'm going to be expert at everything that sits in the core, what do I need and support but not necessarily be expert at? So for example, what you will find there is your technology service providers. You will find perhaps your advertising agency or marketing agency who've understood your brand, understood what you're trying to do, but are working with the very, very complex domains of social media and the like. You need working computers, you need working software. You don't need to be an expert in building computers and building software.
Yes.
If the business you're in is, for example, selling books, that's not core to your capability, but it's very necessary. And once you start to look at your business like that, you will see in preparation for negotiation what you need to shed and what you need to keep. If you don't take that approach and you respond in the instance of being punched in the face, a panic response, I saw businesses shed essential elements of what makes them what makes them valuable. Because it was a panic response to say, I need to stop the bleeding. I need to stop the capital flight out of my business. If I don't have capital preservation, I will die tomorrow. Absolutely right thinking, but a panic response led to panic decisions being made. And that onion method is so simple. Once you have that in place, then there's a 3-stage strategy that I implemented certainly at Auric,
Yes.
and right across our client base. And that is, we have to reset. And Mike, how do you reset a business?
Back to basics, I presume.
And what is basics?
The core of the onion, no?
It's the core of the onion. Who do we serve, and what makes us valuable to them? Go to them. For the first month, I got all our clients to engage in relationship conversations with their customers, not transaction conversations. Build some empathy. Understand what's changing in their worlds, in their lives. Ask how you can be of relevance in their new world, in their new life. Because in that lies the seed of the rebuild you need to instill in your business. Whether it's changing your service, changing your product, changing the way you market and communicate to them, changing the way you sell and price to them, changing the way you fulfill your promise to them. And that rebuild is essential, because if it's done properly, Mike, it institutes a new way of working within the business. And that's how you give leadership to your team. And the reason that's important is because the reset requires you to be right at the front of the battle. But when you rebuild, adjust it to the needs of your clients and customers. That rebuild needs to place you back on the hill, so you can see ahead 6 months down the line where the opportunities are to make up for what you've lost during the lockdown.
Now, the reset process, which is key, speaking to your clients, finding out what it is, engaging with your clients. It's something that we can still do now. It's not something you should have done it 2 months ago.
Absolutely, you have to still do it now.
Yeah.
So what was really interesting is the 2 groups of business behaviors that I saw as the crisis hit. Here in South Africa, in the US, in the UK, it's universal across SMEs, based on certainly what we saw. And what I saw were 2 responses. The first response, so imagine here you are, the captain of a ship, and your business is your ship. The first response was, oh my word, a storm is coming, and it's wild. It's wild. Call it the lockdown, the economic lockdown. What we're going to do is go into the safety of harbour, batten down the hatches, and wait for the storm to pass. And once it's passed, I'll call the crew back onto the ship, and we will go and fish for our living again. 90% of businesses opted for that. 10% turned around and said, the storm is coming. Everyone else is battening down the hatches. Team, we are sailing into it. And we're going to test the hull of our ship. We're going to test your capabilities. And we are going to get to the other side of the storm, so that when it does pass, as it will, like every crisis in the world does, we will be way ahead of our competitors, who will only then be leaving port. We encouraged strongly that second view.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing about crises. We sit and we reflect back a year from now and say, wow, the corona lockdown changed everything. No, it didn't. How does a virus change things? The virus comes, the virus goes. What changed things were those 5 or 10% of businesses that sailed into the storm, and in the midst of everyone expecting things to be different, capitalized on the snap and break in status quo, asked the right questions in order to rebuild their businesses to be relevant in the lives of their customers, and through that set a new way for that sector or industry to work. The 90% that start emerging out of the harbor say, the crisis has come, the crisis has gone. Look how the crisis changed behavior in people.
Yes.
The change in behavior and how people respond and act and behave was led by those 10% businesses. And that is why, if you look at it historically, 6 months after a slump, after a crisis, the businesses that entered into the crisis on the front foot rather than the back foot, those that sailed into the storm, led the change. Those that followed were subject to the change. At any point in time, if you maintain a mindset that says things are constantly changing, as a business leader, you should constantly be of the mindset, I need to find the future in the way it affects how my customers are behaving. So the resetting period, quite honestly, Mike, crisis, no crisis, should be something that you as a business leader conduct every 6 months.
Yes.
Because it's also how innovation takes place in a good, stable, growing economy.
So even though coronavirus has sort of made it, it's almost given us a point in time to, it feels like we need to follow these steps. These are steps we should be taking anyway.
There are steps that we should be taking in anyway.
Normal times.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. There are, when I acquire companies, I look for 4 things in the companies that I acquire. Those companies, if they have a leadership team that favors comfort, that has become slightly complacent because they're on a good wicket, on a good run, opt to blame in certain instances when I challenge and test and question the behavior of certain actions. Oh, well, you know, Pavlo, it's government policy in this country. You know, you never know where you stand. In me pointing a finger at you, there are 3 fingers pointing back at me. And then on the 4th basis, have not created diversity of thought around that leadership team. Those are the 4 elements that create a cancer in a business. And it weakens the business's will for a battle, for a fight. And yet, if you think about it, Mike, if you in a business are not constantly fighting, what are you doing? Because in the small, medium enterprise space, we're up against thousands of competitors. We have got thin balance sheets generally. And we have to fight to win the head, heart, mind, and hand of every customer, of every employee. If you don't maintain that battle-orientated mindset and you fall into a place of comfort, then your opportunity to innovate, remain relevant, and stay ahead. When others that are fighting are instilling and forcing those changes in your customer base. That's where the weak point is. What the crisis does for every business is simply accelerate that opportunity for you.
Yeah.
What could take a year could take 3 weeks.
Yeah.
For years, we have been attempting to digitize our business, and I've had big resistance from my customers. What Corona did for us, and what we managed to do in 2 weeks, is what would have taken us otherwise 2 years.
Yeah, and as we were sharing before we started the session, certain things, even in our case, where this event would have been a live event, it's sort of forced us into the webinar space, and now we're reaching a far bigger audience.
Completely. You know what? I'll share a story with you that I find it so fascinating, this whole idea. And I remember speaking to a colleague of mine. He was the former editor of Business Day, Songezo Zibi. Wonderful guy with a really, really good, clean, sharp mind. And he said to me, we were having the discussion, and he said, so what are your thoughts about where media is going? Because I follow media, being involved in media very, very closely. And I turned around and I said to him, you know, Songezo, I'll never forget an image in my mind as a kid. As a kid, I remember my father getting out of bed in the mornings, putting on his dressing gown, walking to the gate, pacing up and down the gate at 6:30 every morning. And as it went 1 minute past 6, he paced harder and faster. And by 6:05, I could see the agitation coming into him. And then the newspaper would be delivered to the gate. And he could pick up the newspaper and have his morning's movement. Because if he sat on the toilet without the paper, he could not have his movement. And if he did not have his movement, Mike, he was grumpy the whole day. And I was amazed at the power of how information delivered to you in a way governed by the provider of the information could control your life and mood. Today, the world we live in is fundamentally different. The power has come to us as the consumers of the information as to what information, where, when, and how we opt to consume it. This is the single biggest opportunity that a business like yours, given what you do, which is about sharing insight, helping people learn, grow, and be better for the next day. It's the single biggest opportunity that you've been granted in your life. Because all of a sudden, Mike Sham, who ran physical events in South Africa, stands on the precipice of sharing information globally to an audience that values what we as South Africans have to offer. Because what we have to offer is an unconscious resilience and fitness for uncertainty and change.
Yeah. And as you pointed out earlier, it was there all the time. This has provided the impetus to make those hard moves. The rebuild?
The rebuild is all about systems.
Yes.
It sounds terrible, and I bang on about this all the time. And I'm not talking about technology systems. What I'm saying is that as a business owner, the thing that should keep you up at night is this. Statistically, globally, 94.6% of businesses started fail to sell. I'm not talking about the early years of building a business. The failure stats there are dramatic. And yes, they count into that 94%. But what concerns me most are the mid-tier businesses. The individual who's put the 10,000, 20, 30, 40,000 hours into a business. The individual who has built a business employing 40, 50, 60, 120 people. He has provided, she has provided life, value, economy, opportunity for many. They've paid their taxes. They're good to their suppliers. They're even better to their customers. They put food on their table. They educated their kids. They gave clothing, housing, food to their kids. They've done well, Mike. They've done well. And when it comes to the end game, because there are only two options at the end, a sale or closure, 94.6% of them fail to sell. They close. Because the way that they've built their businesses has never lent itself to success in that very last moment. And it's for that reason that the rebuild phase that I speak about over here is driven in a very particular methodology. So going back to your first question, do you build a business to make money as a goal? Yes, it needs to be there. But if you understand your purpose first, and your purpose is premised on understanding who you serve, and in who you serve, what problem you solve for them, it puts you in a position where the way that you reach them through marketing, the way that you would convert them into customers through sales, the way that you would be able to fulfill your promises to them in operations, must be done through systems. And systems are activities in a sequence that can be measured to deliver the outcome of reaching them appropriately, engaging them appropriately, and fulfilling your obligations to them appropriately. If you get that right, it then brings on the third element of rebuild, and that is finding the right people to do the right thing at the right time, building the team to power the systems that deliver the promise of value wanted, desired, and needed by your customers. Once you've got that sequence right, Mike, you have the most precious thing in the world, time. Time. It releases you from the daily, weekly, monthly activities and operations. And with time, you have the opportunity to say, how can I serve better? Do I bring in a new product? Do I adjust and innovate my service? Do I reach new markets? Because your job as the business owner is 10, 20, 30 years from now, at the point where you're ready to start exiting the business, make sure you have built something valuable to the potential buyer. If I look at your business and all I see is a world of problems and trouble, and yes, you're making money, and yes, you've earned a good living, but effectively I'm investing in buying and taking over your headache and heartache, I'm out. 94.6% of businesses started fail to sell. If you don't get the rebuild right, you'll never have the opportunity to go into the reignite phase, which is the time to sit back, reflect, look at the constantly changing environment, acquire the competitors that didn't sail early enough into the storm, buy the plant and equipment from those for 10, 20, 30 cents in the rand, or exacerbate and accelerate your marketing efforts. From there, you not only make up what you had lost in the crisis, but it builds the business into a position that when you are interested in selling, a buyer looks at it and says, gosh, you've grown for the last 3 to 4 years. The forecast you're showing me, premised on the past, is growth as well. I'm interested, let's talk.
Yeah. So we're in the reignite, and we understand that the first step of the reignition is we've rebuilt the business. We've been able to capitalize on businesses that didn't behave as well as us, right? In a sort of a sense, eating other people's lunch because they weren't looking after it. Is there any more that, what else is there in reignition?
Look, reignition requires two things. If you think about what your purpose is as a business owner, so let's just take it back and bring it forward to reignition. Your purpose as a business owner, in the early stages, the reset period over here, is to be relevant to your customers and clients. And Mike, it means only one thing: solving problems for them. Because nobody in the world buys anything that doesn't solve a problem for them. There is no such thing as a luxury market. Nobody buys anything that doesn't solve a problem for them. Once you've understood that, you then articulate your ability to solve those problems by creating the business systems. That puts you in a position to get a good team on board to power the systems, and through that it releases time. And the way that you reignite your business is by doing three things. That time is there to build a culture in your company, a set of values that generates the spirit, the meaning, the way of doing things in the business itself. Your employees need to look to you to develop, build, support, enhance, and define the culture of the company. Systems can take you a long way down the road to articulating what makes you special and delivering on that promise. But there's always a 10-15% edge that needs people with the right mind and the right action defined as culture to operate those systems. The next thing you need to do in Reignite, the opportunities you define must achieve two things. The first is, this is where you deepen value and you deepen growth. The system and the people, in the way that you built this business, will give you organic growth. But what you're looking for is accelerated growth or next level growth. And the way that you need to look for it is, given time, given perspective, given objectivity, it'll either be in new products or new markets where you can solve problems for those new markets in a way that does not disrupt the underlying system of delivery, the business systems and the people who power those systems. Because if you bring in new revenues by entering into a new market or by providing a new service or product, and it disrupts the underlying platform that delivers it for you consistently, it means the time that you had to look at things objectively, see you being pulled back into the daily, weekly, monthly operations to sort out the chaos that you yourself have created. And that has two impacts. It might well increase your revenue, but it increases your costs in tandem. And when I look at what makes for a good, clean exit of a business at a premium price, if I see revenue growth and I see your operating overheads and costs grow with it, I know that I'm simply buying, yes, economy, but I'm also buying a bigger problem at 100 million rands worth of revenue that would have been there at 20 million rands worth of revenue. If in my new opportunity for accelerated growth, I identify it through product and service or new markets in a way that it doesn't disrupt my system of delivery, I get the kicker in growth and the relatively smaller increase in operating overheads. And the yawn, the widening gap, is called EBITDA.
Yeah.
It's the profit. When you grow your turnover and grow your profit, it means, relatively speaking, the growth in turnover and the growth in operating overhead are occurring at different rates. That's the second job of the business owner. The third job of the business owner is to avoid the cancer of comfort, complacency, blame. You need to fight to turn around and say, I'm serving you well, my customer. What could I do better? And even better? Because innovation coming into a business must be customer driven and led. If you have your ideas, you can put it to your customers and evaluate and assess and test what their thoughts and ideas are around it. But if you innovate in isolation of your customers, then you're going to innovate nonsensically. And the last thing you want is for your business sales engagement team to have those conversations. Because if you've built that team right, they are orientated around a transaction. They're not orientated around a relationship. And it's the relationship engagement between us that will let me ask the right questions in an easy way and will let me hear and understand what's being said, as well as listening to what's being said. In that lies the seed of innovation. And in my view, those are the three primary roles: culture, accelerated growth, and innovation. That's where a business owner and a business leader needs to be. And you can't be there if you have not created a business that's relevant to the customers you serve and is delivered and articulated through both business systems and people, because you won't have the time.
Yep.
That's reignition.
Yep. And that is the lesson of today. And none of this happens without crystal clear and decisive leadership.
None of it happens without right mind and right action. You need to be on the right side of the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross curve, always. Always. And then you need to have a methodology, and that methodology must be structured and clear. Because when you implement a methodology and approach, it's very easy for you as a business owner to get lost and wrapped up in it itself. If you've got the methodology, you can almost stand outside of it rather than be in it. What people refer to as working on the business as opposed to in it.
Yes. Pavlo, you have given us so much information, and it's in here. Everybody who's struggling with taking their business to the next level, it's in here. And we're going to make this available to people watching this webinar. They'll be able to access it. We'll have links as to where they can get hold of the book. But I really have to thank you for your time today. It's just been, this has been consulting lesson that every businessman should have. I'm sitting over here sort of thinking that I've learned a lot. There's a lot that needs to happen, and I hope that many people out there are getting the same value from this. So thank you so much for your time. Get this book. Thank you, Pavlo.
Thank you very much. Can I have one condition on the book?
Yes.
If you do get the book and you do read it, let me know your thoughts.